Okay, so Mike Nichols, senior product designer. I work on the Create source code management team. Been there a couple of months. And oops, it's a little bit about the presentation I'm going to give and why I got there, and a little bit of foreshadowing. So like I said, I've only been on this stage for a couple of months, and when it came time around for UX presentation, like I normally do, I was trying to weasel out of it because I'm like, hey, we don't have any big topics that I've really gotten into. And I was talking to Marcel, and he's like, well, I really like the way you just break down some of your solutions. So why don't you just give a presentation on that? So that's what we'll be doing here today. Also, a little bit of foreshadow there. So today's presentation, the 7 Whys, a design story. Not my original artwork, stolen from Beck Beasy. So our story starts with a little bit of collaboration from Austin. So Austin, demonstrating some great collaboration, pinged me on an issue to look at an area, GPG keys, which is kind of off in your personal settings. And it's not the kind of area that you venture into very often. It is, there's not a lot of features that have been done with it, and there's not a lot of work that's gone on there. So the key thing to take away here is the last sentence there. I don't understand all the reasons why a GPG key might be considered unverified. So that brings us to our first why. Why would a GPG key be considered unverified? So a little bit how that got investigated, right? So I started off reading through the issues. Austin had provided a lot of information there. From there, went to the docs, started reading the docs. In both of those, there was reference to emails. And from that point, I created several GPG keys, uploaded them, and kind of did some testing to see what happens when you do that and change the parameters and different logins and stuff like that. And as it turns out, that GPG keys are not verified. What are verified are emails and then commits that are verified with GPG keys that have verified emails. So it turns out we don't really have a concept of verified GPG keys, which leads us to our second why. So if a GPG key is not verified, why are we displaying that it is? And the answer to that is, it turns out the verification badge is just associated with the email here. And what we really have is a layout problem. So since the verified badge is kind of tucked in between the two there, it's really causing the confusion that GPG keys are verified. Really what we're showing here is the email that's verified. So that brings us to our first solution. So let's just clean up the design and figure out how we can just lay this out a little better so it's a little clearer. So reordered the information, put the key at the top since that's the key piece of information. Separated each line into each piece of information on its own line, and then added labels in places that labels didn't exist. So a couple of whys, and we're already to our first solution. But the second why, and this is where the story turns a little bit. I'm sure some of you have already noticed this when you were looking at the screenshots. Why are there two primary buttons that one says revoke and one says delete, right? One, they're both primary buttons and they're both seemingly doing a similar action. So this is one of those things like once you see it, you can't unsee it. So this was the second why, or the third why really. So the answer to that question is, there turns out there are really two distinct actions here. There is a difference between revoking and removing the keys. And the difference comes in with revoking is essentially taking both past and future keys. So saying any commit that has ever been associated with this GPG key, unverified. Removing it simply does that moving forward. So let's look at the steps that this would require for a user to do. So with our current user interface, user must notice that there are two options. They must figure out that there is in fact a difference between those two. They have to possibly click on a very scary button, right? It's a red primary button that has a trash can on. These are scary things to click on. If they do click on it, luckily we do have a modal that it kind of explains what's happening here. But if they're unwilling to do all that, the only other option would be to go to the docs, and there's no link provided there. So they go to the docs, they search for GPG key, they read and understand the difference between these two. They then have to associate the term revoke and remove to that difference, go back to the UI, and figure out what button to press based on the memory of what those terms revoke and remove meant. Now, show of hands, does anybody remember which one's which? I worked on this for a couple of weeks. I still don't remember, right? And the last thing is even if you were looking for remove, you then have to figure out that delete icon means remove. So might be that last one there. Which leads us to why number 4. Why would we want to do that to our users? And the answer is we do not want to do that to our users. So that brings us to our next solution. And that next solution is let's just not do that, right? Let's give a single button and then we can move that into a modal and we can provide some more context from there. So little plot twist here. So what I like to do at this point is kind of go back and go into history and see, okay, well, why was this designed this way in the first place, right? Like, let's go back far and let's see where this feature was introduced. Unfortunately, this went back so far that this predates issues, at least as far as what was searchable. But what was interesting that I found is turns out Marcel tackled this very same topic 2 years ago. And so now the question is like, does Marcel really like the way I break things down, or did it just happen that I was tackling an issue that he unknowingly did 2 years before? So a quick bonus why, like, okay, if Marcel did this 2 years ago, why didn't it get done? So I asked him about that. And it turns out that was one of the first issues that he worked on. And there was 0 participants in it other than myself until very recently. So just a cautionary note, like, 1, if you don't have anybody participating in your issues, they're never going to go anywhere. And 2, like, I think we all did that when we first started GitLab. We created a few issues that are probably hanging out there that are probably good ideas. So maybe go back and check your first week at GitLab kind of work. So there was one key difference between Marcel's solution and my solution, which leads us to why number 6. Why do I think a radio button is a better choice than a checkbox? So Marcel's solution was to basically give you the revoke path and then let you, as a checkbox, secondarily choose, like, do you also want to unverify signed commits? What I'm suggesting is that we go to a radio button, and here's my very opinionated reasons why. To me, it feels like more of a choice that the user makes, and it's less likely to miss. Those two are kind of combined together. Like, if it's just a checkbox, you could easily skip past that, but a radio button forces you to make a choice, and we can still default to it. Since there are 2 choices, there are more opportunity for help text. And if you really do know your GPG commands, if you're a very advanced user and understand those things, it does give us the chance to reference those things as revoke and delete, which are the actual commands, so it might trigger that. And then also, side note on that, I chose to use the word remove instead of revoke because it was neither it was neither revoke or delete, which are the actual commands. So I think the process should be that it's the third one, since revoke and delete are kind of reserved terms since they're the technical commands there. Which leads us to why number 7. So if this has been hanging out there for 2 or so years and we really haven't any complaints about it, and it's in an area that you almost never touch, like, why does this matter? Like, why do I care about fixing this? Why am I giving a presentation on it? And the answer kind of lies in, like, why would you want to remove a GPG key in the first place? So it's probably a bad day that's going on there when you need to remove that key. You got hacked or you've lost it, your computer's out of sync, like, you're not having a good day the day that you need to replace this. It is possible that you might just want to refresh them, but in generally it's a bad day. So this is probably a pretty frustrating moment, and these are the kind of things that get remembered. And if you force someone to go through this ridiculous like roundabout, then that's the kind of like moment that they're going to remember. So looking at this is from the Kano model kind of graph of, you know, where attractive features and must be. I would say that this probably falls on the must be. In the situation where somebody needs to remove a GPG key, if you can't do it, it's going to fall off really quickly. So this is going to go down that graph pretty fast. And the fact that this is rarely used means that every time a user comes back, they likely have to go back through this again. So much like we couldn't remember 2 minutes ago which one's which, if we don't do that, then they have to do this all over again every single time they come to this. So the moral of the story is, you don't always need a complicated process to solve design problems. Sometimes it's just as simple as asking why a whole bunch of times. So my advice is ask why a lot, ask each other why so we can collaborate. And when you get to that moment where you think, I've asked why enough, try asking why one more time and then see where that takes you. And that's it.